In this episode, we are moving into one of the most important moments in the life of a system change, which is the point where planning stops being mostly theoretical and the organization has to move real services, real technology, and real information into place. This part of the journey can sound straightforward because the words migration, deployment, and conversion feel like normal project language, but each one carries serious operational and control risk. For a learner preparing for the Certified Information Systems Auditor (CISA) certification, this topic matters because many technology efforts do not fail during design meetings or status updates. They fail when the organization tries to move from an old state to a new one and discovers that systems are not where they should be, supporting infrastructure is incomplete, or data no longer behaves the way the business expects. System migration is about moving systems or services from one environment, platform, or arrangement to another. Infrastructure deployment is about putting the needed technical foundation into place so the system can operate. Data conversion is about transforming existing information so it remains useful, accurate, and trusted in the new environment. Together, these activities determine whether a new implementation becomes a smooth transition or a disruptive business event. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. System migration is the broader movement of an application, service, or workload from one state to another, and that movement can happen for many reasons. An organization may migrate because old technology is aging out, because the business has grown, because licensing or support conditions changed, or because leaders want better performance, resilience, or cost management. At a high level, migration means the system is no longer staying where it was before. It may be moving to new hardware, a new hosting model, a different operating environment, a different application structure, or a reworked business process. A beginner might assume migration is simply copying something from one place to another, but that view is too narrow. Real migration often affects interfaces, user access, supporting jobs, monitoring, backup processes, documentation, and the expectations of the people who rely on the system every day. When auditors look at migration, they are not only interested in whether the move happened. They want to know whether the move preserved control, reduced avoidable risk, and protected the business from preventable interruption. Infrastructure deployment is related, but it focuses on the technical foundation needed for the new or changed system to run correctly. Infrastructure includes servers, storage, networks, security layers, connectivity, system software, and the surrounding services that support processing, communication, and protection. A system may look ready in a project plan, but if the infrastructure underneath it is missing, misconfigured, undersized, or poorly secured, the implementation can fail almost immediately. It helps to imagine a new office opening in a building where the furniture has arrived, but electricity, badges, phones, and climate control are not actually ready. The office technically exists, yet it cannot function properly because the underlying support is incomplete. The same idea applies here. Infrastructure deployment is not just about turning on equipment or reserving capacity. It is about creating an operating environment that can support the application consistently, securely, and at a level that matches business needs. That means infrastructure decisions affect performance, availability, access, resilience, and the organization's confidence that the system can handle real production conditions. Data conversion adds another layer of complexity because business value often lives inside the information, not just inside the software that processes it. When an organization moves to a new system, it rarely starts with an empty history. It already has customer records, financial details, inventory data, employee information, transactions, settings, and reference tables that need to remain usable after the change. Data conversion is the process of taking that existing information and transforming it into a structure that the new system can understand and trust. This may involve reformatting fields, combining values, separating combined values, changing codes, cleaning up errors, or deciding what historical information should be carried forward. Many beginners assume data can simply be exported from one system and imported into another, but real business data is rarely that neat. Different systems organize information differently, apply different rules, and expect different levels of completeness. A conversion that seems minor on paper can create major reporting errors, broken workflows, and user confusion if meaning is lost along the way. That is why data conversion is both a technical task and a business integrity task. These three activities are easier to understand when seen as connected parts of one transition rather than as isolated jobs handled by separate teams. Migration moves the system. Infrastructure deployment provides the place and conditions for the moved system to operate. Data conversion ensures the business information arriving with that system still makes sense in the new environment. If any one of these areas is weak, the others may not matter much because the overall implementation can still fail. A perfectly migrated application will not help if the infrastructure cannot support the required workload. Strong infrastructure will not save the day if converted data is inaccurate, incomplete, or mismatched to the new design. Clean data alone is not enough if the system itself has not moved correctly or its dependencies were overlooked. For that reason, good implementation planning treats these efforts as tightly connected. Teams need shared timing, shared assumptions, shared decision points, and a shared understanding of what the business needs on day one. An auditor will often look for those connections because fragmented planning is one of the easiest ways for hidden risk to grow. Planning and readiness are especially important because most migration problems are easier to prevent before the move than to fix during a crisis. The organization needs to know what is being moved, what depends on it, who owns the decision-making, and what business periods create more or less tolerance for disruption. That means identifying interfaces, security dependencies, user groups, backup needs, support responsibilities, and the order in which pieces must change. If a payroll system depends on identity services, network rules, scheduled jobs, and database connectivity, those relationships need to be understood before the migration starts, not discovered during a failed cutover. Timing also matters because the same technical move can produce very different outcomes depending on whether it happens during a quiet period or during a critical business cycle. Readiness includes having documentation, approvals, testing results, support coverage, and fallback thinking in place before the actual move occurs. The deeper lesson is that migration work is not just about motion. It is about controlled motion, where the organization understands enough about the current and future state to move with purpose instead of improvisation. One major decision during migration is the overall approach the organization will take, and different approaches create different benefits and risks. Some changes happen all at once, where the old environment is replaced by the new one in a single cutover period. This can reduce the length of transition, but it also concentrates risk because many things must go right at the same time. Other migrations happen in phases, where components, locations, or groups of users move gradually over time. That approach can reduce shock and allow learning between stages, but it may introduce complexity because old and new arrangements have to coexist for a while. In some situations, organizations run the old and new systems side by side for a limited period to compare outputs and build confidence before full transition. That can improve assurance, but it also increases cost and coordination needs. A beginner does not need to memorize endless models to understand the key point. Every migration approach is a trade-off between speed, simplicity, control, and risk concentration, and auditors care about whether the chosen approach matched the business and technical realities involved. Infrastructure deployment has its own risks because the environment must be more than merely present. It needs to be suitable for the system that will depend on it. Capacity is one concern, since a system may perform well in testing but struggle in production if the infrastructure cannot handle real user volume, data processing demand, or peak activity periods. Compatibility is another concern because connected systems, operating components, network paths, and security controls all need to work together in a stable way. Access also matters because administrators, support staff, and business users may need carefully defined permissions in the new environment before the system becomes operational. Security settings cannot be treated as an afterthought, since weak access control, poor segmentation, or incomplete logging can create problems even if the system appears to function normally. Monitoring and support tools must also be ready so that early problems can be seen quickly rather than discovered through customer complaints or operational failure. Infrastructure deployment is successful when the environment is not only built, but built in a way that supports the required service levels, controls, and recovery expectations of the organization. Data conversion requires particularly careful thinking because data has meaning, and that meaning must survive the move. A name field may not simply be a name field if the old system stored titles, nicknames, and identifiers together while the new system expects them to be separated. A financial code may look like a small value, but if the new system interprets it differently, reports can become inaccurate even though the data technically loaded without error. That is why data mapping is so important. Mapping is the disciplined comparison of old data elements to new data elements so the organization understands how meaning, format, and business purpose are being carried forward. Data cleansing may also be needed because a new system often exposes long-hidden problems such as duplicate records, invalid values, missing required fields, or inconsistent naming conventions. A conversion effort that blindly carries forward poor data can simply move old weaknesses into a newer and more expensive environment. From an audit perspective, this area matters because bad data can damage decision-making, compliance, customer service, and confidence in the new system even when the technology itself seems stable. Testing and validation sit across all three areas because movement alone does not prove success. The organization needs evidence that the migrated system works as intended in its new location, that the deployed infrastructure supports normal and peak operations, and that converted data remains accurate, complete, and usable. Functional testing may confirm that core processes work. Performance testing may show whether the infrastructure can sustain expected demand. Reconciliation checks may compare record counts, totals, balances, or selected samples between old and new environments to confirm that conversion results make business sense. User review is also important because people who understand the process often notice subtle problems that automated checks may miss, such as a report that runs but presents values in a misleading way. A common beginner mistake is to think testing ends once the software appears to launch correctly in the new environment. In reality, implementation validation should confirm business function, control operation, interface behavior, and data reliability. The question is never just whether the new environment is alive. The question is whether it is alive in a trustworthy and business-ready way. Controls matter throughout this transition because system change creates opportunity for both honest mistakes and unmanaged risk. Approvals should exist for key decisions, including what is moving, when it is moving, and who has accepted any remaining issues. Segregation of duties is important so that no single person controls every part of the migration, conversion, and release without review. Access to production environments and sensitive data should be limited and monitored because implementation windows often involve powerful privileges that can be misused or mishandled. Documentation should capture what was planned, what was executed, what exceptions occurred, and what evidence supports the final result. Backup and recovery capabilities should be clear, since the organization may need to restore or fall back if serious issues appear. Auditors look at these controls not because they want to slow progress, but because implementation is one of the periods when organizations are most vulnerable to confusion, shortcut taking, and incomplete accountability. A well-controlled migration is not simply faster or cleaner. It is more believable, more supportable, and less likely to damage the business under pressure. Several common misconceptions can make this topic harder for new learners if they are not addressed directly. One misconception is that infrastructure deployment is mostly a hardware issue, when in reality it includes security, connectivity, monitoring, support tooling, and many other conditions that shape production behavior. Another misconception is that if most data converts successfully, the organization is probably fine. That sounds reasonable until the missing or incorrect portion turns out to affect billing, payroll, regulatory reporting, or customer history. A third misconception is that migration success can be measured mainly by whether the cutover finished on time. Time matters, but a punctual failure is still a failure if the new environment produces unstable services or unreliable information. There is also a tendency to assume that once the technical teams sign off, the business risk has been handled. In truth, Business users, control owners, support groups, and leadership all need confidence that the new arrangement works in practice. The visible move is only part of the story. The real objective is a controlled transition that preserves capability, integrity, and trust. After the move happens, the organization enters a stabilization period that is often less dramatic than cutover day, but just as important. Early monitoring should focus on whether transactions are completing properly, whether interfaces are behaving as expected, whether users can do their work, and whether converted data is supporting reports and decisions correctly. Support teams need to know what kinds of issues are expected, what signals indicate something serious, and how to escalate problems quickly. Some issues appear only after a few days of normal use because certain reports, business cycles, or exception cases did not occur during the initial release window. That is why organizations should pay attention not only to immediate technical status, but also to business feedback, reconciliation results, and control performance during the early operational period. A good implementation does not end when the switch is flipped. It ends when the system is functioning dependably enough that normal operations can continue without unusual intervention, elevated anxiety, or constant project team rescue. This stabilization period provides evidence about whether the transition worked in the deeper sense, not just in the ceremonial sense. From the perspective of CISA, the auditor's role is not to perform the migration or configure the infrastructure directly. The role is to evaluate whether the processes, controls, evidence, and decisions around the transition were adequate to reduce risk to an acceptable level. That includes reviewing planning, readiness, approvals, testing, reconciliation, fallback options, security controls, and post-implementation monitoring. An auditor wants to understand whether the organization knew what it was moving, prepared the target environment properly, protected the integrity of the data, and validated the result in a way that management could reasonably rely upon. The auditor is also interested in whether unresolved issues were documented and whether risk acceptance was clear rather than implied. This matters because many failures are not caused by a complete lack of effort. They are caused by weak discipline, poor coordination, and overconfidence during a critical transition. A strong audit perspective helps reveal those weaknesses early by asking whether the evidence supports the organization's confidence. Confidence by itself is not assurance. Confidence supported by tested and controlled implementation is much closer to assurance. The main theme should be clear. System migration, infrastructure deployment, and data conversion are all about moving an organization from one operational reality to another without losing control along the way. Migration changes where and how the system runs. Infrastructure deployment creates the environment that makes that system workable. Data conversion carries the meaning of the business forward so the new environment can actually serve people, transactions, and decisions. When these activities are well planned, carefully controlled, and properly validated, the transition can feel smooth even if a great deal of complexity sits underneath it. When they are rushed or poorly coordinated, the business may experience outages, inaccurate information, broken processes, and a sharp loss of confidence in the very system meant to improve operations. For exam preparation, keep the central idea simple and strong. A successful implementation is not just a technical move from old to new. It is a controlled business transition that preserves service, safeguards integrity, and gives management reasonable evidence that the new state is ready to support real-world work.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.